Hey everybody, Dr. Adamson here, and I wanted to give you a quick video giving you a few tips and reminders as you prepare both for the exam and the upcoming paper. I think I've given you, all the resources that you need, but I also thought you might be able to use a short video giving you some guidance for those of you who still are not sure how to prepare, and that's understandable. So to prepare for the test, obviously I've sent you a study guide. That should be the main focus for you. And why have I given you this list of basic terms? Because if you can understand what each of those terms means within the thinking of Kant and Mill, how each of those terms is used, then you will be prepared for the test. So those basic terms, of course, are tied to key ideas. A lot of the terms are just everyday words like respect that we use all the time. But within Kant's philosophy, it has a very specific role to play. It has a very specific meaning in how he understands ethics. So you need to be able to connect the term respect to that specific idea. And then overall, if you can put all of the words together, all the terms together and ideas, then the goal is for you, of course, to be able to explain how Kant thinks about ethics and how Mill thinks about ethics, and you will use those terms appropriately, of course, within the explanation. So that's the overall goal. It's just nothing more than saying you understand the basic structure and the basic logic of Kant's ethics. Same with Mill. And again, I want to remind you that I don't care if you never remember the name Kant again for the rest of your life, as long as when people talk to you about right and wrong, when you hear things coming out of your own mouth about right and wrong, you're able to recognize and understand, oh, that's a pattern I've seen before. I've learned how that works. We're talking about basic rights, and I know why that's important, and I can explain that to myself and make sense of it. We are all Kant, we are all Mill in different ways. So just as a quick example, we might say for Kant, and this is laid out in the neat notes and in a bit in the document I sent you about a week ago on ways to screw up in ethics. You might say for Kant, he says something like this: we are all free as human beings. We are all free to make choices. This is autonomy. That's just a fancy word for the ability to make free choices. And in that sense, we seem to differ from cats and dogs and chickens who make choices, but it's not clear that they really are able to stop and ask themselves, what should I do? Right? What's the right thing to do? To the extent that we're capable of that, we are morally free. He says there's no moral responsibility without freedom. So we don't lock chickens up for a crime because we don't believe they were really free to choose. So there's no moral responsibility without freedom. So freedom is the basis of all morality and all responsibility. That means, first of all, that for Kant, we should always respect people's right to choose. It's absolutely fundamental. If all morality is based upon freedom, then we have to protect the right to freedom, the right to choose. Secondly, if morality is based upon our freedom, and if we're responsible for our choices, Kant argues, we can only really be responsible for the intentions and not for the results, because many times we will intend to do something good and it might backfire, or we might intend to do something bad and it might work out great for people. In neither case do we say the intentions don't matter. In fact, the intentions are what do matter. So we should examine the intent of our actions, and finally, he has ways of telling us how we should evaluate the intention. We should treat our intention as a kind of law. Imagine I say, in order to make my friend happy, I'm going to steal something from the store and give it to them as a present. We would say, okay, Adamson, is that right or wrong? How do you know? Well, let's imagine that that was a law everyone had to follow. In order to give someone a present, you had to steal from someone else. Would that be a law that everyone would respect? If you can say yes, honestly, then you say yes. Then my action, which I just made a law, is a respectable law. If not, you can't say. Okay, so I'm just laying out. This is the kind of thing. Kant has a logic, he has arguments, and I want you to work at getting familiar with that in my neat notes, try to lay that out as good as possible in the lectures as well. Okay, that then relates to the essays in part 2 of the exam. And what you should know is that each essay really focuses on, it's written very specifically. I designed them, in very specific ways, so that each question focuses on one or two key issues in that philosopher's view. So you should be really, really surprised when you look at the essays for Kant if there's not at least one of those that brings up the issue of freedom and respect that I just went through, right? But not all 4 of those essays are going to deal with the same parts of Kant's theory. So each of those essays is designed to pick out and have you emphasize one or two key ideas in Kant's view and use the scenario to explain his view. And I want you, as it says, to lay out the reasoning, the explanation behind the advice he would give. Okay, as for the paper, again, I would encourage you to look at the document, Ways to Screw Up in Ethics, and specifically at the end of that, the last page or so, where I talk about the fact that ethical theories can actually agree on a lot of things. So you may have a lot of scenarios where all of the theories agree that in this case you should tell the truth, right? In this case you should be kind. In this case you should give the money back. Or you can think of lots of scenarios where they're going to give you the same advice. But the complexity comes in, they will come to the same conclusion but using different reasoning. Kant because, of course, it could be a law, but Mill because that's the thing that's going to make the most people the most happy. Aristotle perhaps because that's going to show good character. And Gilligan because it's going to strengthen relationships. So they may come to the same conclusion on the surface, but for very different reasons. Now, with respect to your paper, the last few paragraphs of that document should be helpful, where I talk about social issues. What I say is in social issues, there may be many different reasons to support one side or the other. And these reasons will fall into one of our 4 categories. For example, there are several good reasons to support capital punishment. Some from Mill's perspective, that it's good for society as a whole. Some perhaps based upon Aristotle's reasoning, and some perhaps based upon Kant's reasoning. But there are many reasons on the other side against capital punishment that might also appeal to Mill, to Kant, to Aristotle, to Gilligan. So every major social issue, you should expect some reasons from different theories on both sides. What I'm asking you to do is look for a social issue that clearly tilts to one side or the other with respect to Kant and Mill, where you find, there's one or two kind of reasons over here that could relate to Kant, but almost all of them are about Mill, about social safety and protection and reducing crime and all that it's good for society, right? And then you look on the other side and you say, there's a couple of ideas like that there, and yet almost all of these arguments have to do with rights and freedom and not being violated by the government and things like that. There you have a situation where the predominance of the issue is Mill versus Kant. I want you to identify those. There are many of them. And I want you to take some of the reasons that you find and just explain. Help me see that you can identify this as Mill's way of thinking and this as Kant ways of thinking, and show that you've learned enough now to be able to recognize these ways of thinking within a social issue that we all know about. Let me give you just a couple quick examples, not on the scale of social issues, but in everyday life where we face this kind of dilemma, because it may be something that some of you struggle with. The dilemma I'm calling rights versus goods. Goods meaning things that benefit, right? Produce more happiness for society. Imagine that we have a religion discussion in our class. It could be this class, right? Let's say we decide to talk about religion for a couple of weeks, and we have lots of discussions, and it turns out that one of us is espousing a very wacky, very strange, and maybe even dangerous religious view, or a view that many of us would find very tough to accept. Maybe a religion that advocated, some kinds of discrimination, or, men have more power than women, something like that, right? How should I, as an instructor, and how should we as a class deal with something like that? Well, why is that a question? It's a question because, on the one hand, we all value very, very deeply the rights of every person to believe what they want to believe with respect to religion. Right? This has been part of the American tradition for 300 years, and we are all very committed to it. It's important to us that people's right to religion not be violated. So the last thing we want to do is tell someone to stop expressing their views about religion. On the other hand, why is it a dilemma? On the other hand, we recognize that someone espousing views that might threaten some of us, or might, indirectly threaten some of us, or make some of us feel like we're being discriminated against, etc., it's going to cause a disturbance in the class. It's going to make it harder for us to learn. It's going to make it harder for us to accomplish our goals. So it's not good for us as a community to have those kinds of disturbances when we're trying to achieve things like learning. So there you have Kant, right? We all care deeply about rights, but we also care deeply about something like harmony and social harmony, because without that, we can't get anything done, whether it's in the classroom or anywhere else. Another weird example I thought of was like, say you have a sleepover. I don't know if people do that anymore. Let's say you're in junior high, you have a sleepover, and you've got eight or nine people there, and the whole group, except one, decides that they're going to do some things that are a little, maybe drinking. I don't want to get into details, but you can imagine, right? We're just going to do some things and have some fun. And they want everyone to participate, and there's one person there who says, you know what, I just don't feel right doing that. I don't want to do that. I'm not condemning you, but I don't want to participate. What's the right thing to do there? It's the same kind of situation, isn't it? Where, on the one hand, no one wants to force someone else against their will, that's Kant, right? Against their will, to participate in something they're not comfortable with. No one wants to force that. Everyone wants to respect every person's right to say, no, I don't choose to do that. On the other hand, it's going to ruin the party, right? The whole point of being together is that everyone joins in, that you all have fun. And one person sort of holding out is going to kind of ruin it. So, again, the whole point of this is we value individual conscience very deeply. And yet we also recognize that certain things are better for a group, and it's important for us to care about the happiness of the group. One other quick example. Many of you might have had this in high school, where you were told by your school that you had to volunteer for credit, or you had to volunteer to graduate, very common these days. Well, there's a bit of a paradox in that from Kant's perspective, because if you're forced to do it, you're not really volunteering. The word wollen comes from the word will, right? This is one of Kant's main ideas, that you have to freely choose to do something for it to matter. And if you're being forced to do it in order to graduate, you're really not free, and that's wrong. We should recognize that freedom and free choice is the most important thing. So even if people choose not to volunteer, that's their choice. On the other hand, why do those programs exist? Because we recognize we should all be contributing to the common good. We should all be doing things that help other people and society as much as possible. That's Mill. All right. I want you to find that same kind of dilemma, that same kind of dichotomy on procon.org. Among the many, many different issues, some of them will not look like that, but many of them will end up being sort of rights versus common good. And you should be able to find one of those pretty easily and then lay out a few of the reasons on each side showing how this is Kant versus Mill. All right, that's what I've got for you. If you need some help before the exam comes, please don't hesitate to contact me, and I will do my best to help. Take care.